Each night at 8, this is Northcity TV.
Kia ora whānau, welcome to my office, otherwise known as my bedroom. We've got the five of us bunkered down in our tiny 3-bedroom unit, which has its share of challenges as we try not to drive each other up the wall. But we're also trying to look at the positive side of this and recognise that actually this is way more time than we usually get to spend as a family. So, making the most of that when we can. Heading out around the block with the girls on their rollerblades when it's not raining like it has been today. This is definitely a time of, for many people, of fear or anxiety, of uncertainty, of separation from our loved ones. And yet it's also a time of replenishment for the earth. It's a time of rethinking our consumeristic urges. Hopefully many of us will end up detoxed from that need to just go buy. That is part of the way we've been educated in the Western world. Today we had the pleasure of joining Dave and Claire in their whare for a service, and thank you to Dave and Claire, Sophia and William. Really appreciated you giving your time and just leading us in that space. I love Claire's challenge to just be. Also beautiful for those who saw it, Cindy's short worship set that she sent through. Just a reminder that actually God is God and we're not God, and we can just sit and trust and be. Tonight we are going to just journey a little bit, very short time, through the story of what I've called the water walking experiment, where Peter was invited out of the boat. So let's start by reading the story. So this is in Matthew chapter 14, starting at verse 22. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by waves because of the wind against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they landed in Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. Often when we hear this story, or when I've heard this story, it's been in the context of having more faith about we can do these miracles if only we have faith in Jesus. We can walk on water. There's the classic book, if you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. And there's some real gold in some of that. But I think for me, the story is a story that is about overcoming fear. It's a story about the natural fears in life and how we deal with them as Christians. So it's not, I don't want to so much talk today about overcoming the impossible. Clearly what Peter did, we would say was impossible, but yeah, I don't want to talk much about that tonight. I want to talk about the fear, the natural, normal fear that the disciples were feeling in that boat. Fear comes from that human response, that very normal response that God placed in us, that we call fight, flight, or freeze, where the amygdala in your brain senses danger and reacts and gives us the adrenaline or the other drugs that we need to get our body to do what we need it to do to keep us safe. And, back in the day, that would have been escaping from a bear. You would have seen the bear and gone, wow, there's a crazy bear. I'm not even going to think about that. I'm just going to run, or hide behind a rock or do something. But your brain would actually shut off and allow you to just do rather than have to think through it. And so fear was actually a really good thing. Fear is not actually in and of itself a bad thing. I read a post recently as we started this journey of the world responding to the coronavirus, and the post said, so many of my friends who go to church are posting all this stuff about do not be afraid, that all these verses that say don't be afraid, do not fear. And the person said, why are Christians so bad at letting us feel feelings? And I had to stop and think about that, because I would post something saying do not be afraid. Jesus said do not be afraid, and yet when you look at what he meant by what he said, he wasn't ridiculing them for the natural emotion of fear. What he was doing was saying, don't be overcome by your fear. Don't be overwhelmed by your fear. Because, fear can lead to anxiety, and that's something that I've dealt with a lot in my lifetime. Struggles with anxiety, and my amygdala tells me that there's a dangerous situation even when there's not. And so I end up really fearful in a situation that doesn't need me to be fearful. And in that moment, I can be overwhelmed by that. And I think that's what Jesus is talking about here, is actually don't be overwhelmed by this fear. It's perfectly natural in the current climate to have concerns, to have feelings of fear around the virus, around your health, around finances. It's really normal to have those things, and we quote these verses saying, don't worry about what you're going to eat. But that's a normal response. What is meant by that is actually, in your concern about that, in your thinking about that, turn to God in that space. Let him be your rock in that space. I tell my girls all the time when they say they're not brave because they're afraid. And I say, no, bravery isn't not being afraid. Bravery is when you overcome your fear and do it anyway. Peter, he grew up on the sea. He grew up fishing. He was in boats all the time. He knew that when a storm came, if you were out in a boat, you were pretty much stuffed. And so it was really normal for him to be afraid. Once he stepped out of the boat, which I can't even imagine doing, to be perfectly honest. But once he stepped out on it and he was walking towards Jesus, I don't think that he suddenly felt no fear at all, that he didn't see the danger of the storm. He just had more trust in Jesus than his fear. He wasn't held back by his fear. He he was caught up in the love of his teacher, the love of his rabbi, and he'd learned to trust Jesus. And in trusting Jesus, even in the midst of his fear, he could step out into that space. We can know all of the statistics of this current pandemic, the health statistics, the financial statistics, and whatever else. And we can let those statistics be a driver of fear in this lockdown period. Or we can realize that we're in the midst of a storm. We're in the midst of something that we haven't dealt with before. And we can turn to Jesus, put our eyes on him, to be, as Claire said this morning, to be with him. That he would help us to not be overwhelmed by our fear. We can look in this time to God to help us find ways of continuing to truly live, even when we're isolated, even when we can't go out and about. To find ways to love. Love overcomes fear. I came across a poem this week. The author's only identified as CD, so I'm not sure who wrote it, but I just thought it was a really beautiful short piece that spoke exactly to this thing, because I've read some horrendous posts from some, what I think are horrendous posts from some Christians, suggesting, not so much in New Zealand, but elsewhere, that churches choose to ignore the restrictions that the government has put in place because we shouldn't be fearful of this virus, and seeing Christians saying, I'm not afraid, so I'm happy to go out and about. And for me, that's actually missed the point, because this isn't about fear. Us not meeting together isn't about fear. It's about caring for the vulnerable amongst us. It's about loving those who this would have a true toll on. There's every chance that if I get coronavirus, I'm going to get through it okay. But there's others who wouldn't. And so out of love, I can act on their behalf and keep myself away from them, that they are more safe, that they feel the love through our distance from them. This is the poem that I found. And then the whole world walked inside and shut their doors and said, we will stop it all, everything, to protect our weaker ones, our sicker ones, our older ones, and nothing in the history of humankind ever felt more like love than this. So that's my invitation to us today, is to think of how can we love? How can we overcome our fears? By turning our eyes on Jesus, by accepting his invitation to walk towards him in the midst of a storm. I'm just going to finish now by playing Te Rautini's song Peter, written from this exact space of stepping out, moving towards Jesus when he invites us, when he says, haere mai, come. So, kia ora whānau, be blessed, keep safe, keep well, and let's keep on loving each other.
You're there in the light and in the dark. Your open arms You say come, come, and you say come, come. Hide in my, hide in my, hide in my, hide in my. Dip your feet into the water, dip your feet into the water, you'll find me there. I'm the voice in the night, the outstretched hand. Dip your feet into the water, dip your feet into the water. Humbly I come, oh, down pulls me deep. You know how I fail, yet you reach out for me. No pause, just fewer. Pure believe, and you say come, come, and you say come.